This was the last gasp to really impress your neighbors.
Hello and welcome to See You Live. I'm Susan Post, Associate Editor of Columbus Underground, and I have with me today Bucky Cutright, who is the founder and co-owner of Columbus Ghost Tours. Bucky, thanks for joining us.
Hi Susan, thank you.
We are standing in Greenlawn Cemetery right now, so going to be talking some more about the cemetery and its history. But first, I'm going to clarify something. Greenlawn Cemetery and Greenlawn Abbey, not the same, totally different entities. So kind of give us a quick rundown of the difference.
Okay, well, yeah, they're completely separate entities. They just happen to be located near one another. You know, the Abbey is a mausoleum just a little ways down the road. They just created some space for new residents there and had their first new interment recently.
Okay.
Yeah, this place is a historic graveyard here in Columbus. It was founded in 1848 and actually born out of, in part, an epidemic.
Right.
We used to have a lot of urban cemeteries, and around 1848 to 1851, there was a huge cholera outbreak, partially spread by having corpses in the drinking water. So for sanitation purposes, they started digging them up and moving them to these what are called rural cemeteries, even though it is urban now.
Right.
And that's how this was brought about. A lot of the first burials here were cholera victims.
Okay. Well, and you know, it might seem kind of weird for us to be standing in a cemetery filming, but you know, you were kind of touching on this. The cemetery is actually really important to Columbus's history, and you know, walking around, you recognize a lot of names of you know, significant spots in Columbus now. I mean, so just tell us a little bit more about kind of what we'll find here and what it means to Columbus. Yeah,
well, these rural cemeteries were meant to be more than just a place for the dead. They were meant to be a place for the living. There weren't parks in the 1800s, really. They weren't a thing. So these cemeteries were designed to be places where you could visit, have an afternoon picnic, you know. There's commune with nature. There's, I believe, 16 state champion trees here in the cemetery. But yes, there were also a lot of prominent burials. Samuel Prescott Bush is buried here, the grandfather of George H. Bush. Woodrow Wilson's parents or grandparents are buried here as well. And the inventor of the commercial tomato, Alexander Livingston.
Fun fact.
Yeah, the very first person to swim from Cuba to the United States to Florida is buried here. The author James Thurber, the artist Alice Schlee. There's just a lot of
significant history. Yeah. So about how many folks are buried here?
Around 150,000.
Wow.
So.
Okay. And is it still an active cemetery?
Yes, it is. I believe they have room for enough burials to continue operating for another 100 years.
Wow. That's wild.
Yeah, it is.
When you were mentioning too that, I mean, maybe not all the folks that are buried here have headstones either, or why would that be?
Well, yeah, these, a lot of the monuments during the Victorian era were elaborate. This was the last gasp to really impress your neighbors and loved ones, but they were very expensive, so not a lot of people could afford those. And there are quite a few burials where they might have had wooden markers that have since deteriorated, or they were just didn't have anyone left to pay for a monument for them. So there were a lot of them in here that are you wouldn't know about.
Potentially unmarked, Well, tell us a little bit more about where we're standing right now. This is kind of a really interesting stone and piece here.
Yes, it is. It's probably one of the most beloved monuments in Central Ohio, I would have to say. It's Georgie Blount. He was a 5-year-old boy who lived in the American House Hotel, which was a hotel on the corner of State and High Street where Rife Center is now. His father ran the hotel. And in 1873, he was going on a carriage ride with his parents, and he unfortunately was trying to ride the rails of the staircase from the 4th floor down, and he fell and struck his head on a cast iron stove at the base, and that's how he became. He was their only child and very beloved, so they had this portrait taken of him shortly before the accident, and they had a sculptor create this likeness. And people visit here all the time. They bring him clothing and dress him in the winter.
When we walked
toys
up, there were some interesting little bits here.
Yes, a lot of people like to leave toys for him. Unfortunately, while that's a kind gesture, it does damage to the stone. And the cemetery now asks for people to donate these things to living children, rather than George. He doesn't need them anymore. So yeah, they have a box at the cemetery office where that can be done. So.
That's great. You know, so that's just kind of one example of a really interesting story. What are some of the other kind of cool stories and lore tied to some of the folks that are buried here?
Oh, there's just a ton of them. There are lots and lots of murder victims that I always like to talk about on our tours, and murderers. There's a professor, James Howard Snook, who in 1929 famously murdered his mistress, a young student at OSU, Theora Hicks, and his ghost has been said to be seen wandering the section of the cemetery where he is buried. There are a number of other residents who supposedly are not so restful that haunt various locations around the city as well.
Have you ever seen any of them or experienced any of it here?
No, I have not.
Okay. But
Yet.
There you go. You know, if you do want to hear more ghost stories about Greenlawn and experience it, you do have a few Columbus ghost tours that come through here. Tell us more about those.
Yes. Yeah, we have a daytime tour of Greenlawn that visits the graves of people who are said to haunt various locations. Now, that particular tour route focuses mostly on Civil War era ghosts, which that was a particularly disastrous time in American history. So a lot of ghost stories turned up as a result. And for the first time ever, the cemetery has offered us the opportunity to give night tours. So we've been doing those and giving people a rare opportunity to be in the cemetery after dark, and it will make you jump.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd be brave enough for that one.
We don't really, our tours aren't designed to be a kind of a scary boo, you know, jump scare thing, but it's a little unnerving in here after dark.
I bet. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing more with us about the history of Greenlawn Cemetery and some of its residents, shall we say.
Yes.
And if you want to check out those tours, we'll have a link to Columbus Ghost Tours website as well. Also, if you want to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks.